under the great dome of Oroth Station, where alien ships from 100 worlds came and went. The air was thick with the noise of merchants bargaining, engines rumbling, and announcements echoing across the metallic halls. Yet even in such a busy place there was room for cruelty to be seen by everyone who passed. For in the middle of the central concourse an old alien named Vorik stood trembling, his long robe faded and patched, his eyes dull with age and fatigue. And in front of him loomed the towering station guards whose armor gleamed under the neon lights, their voices loud and sharp as they demanded that he pay his overdue bill for docking and food, or be cast out into the lower levels of the station where the forgotten and the unwanted vanished into shadows, and the crowd that gathered nearby watched, but kept their distance, whispering to one another yet making no move to help. For the guards had a reputation for harshness and few wished to be caught in their anger, and so Vorik stood alone, his frail hands clutching a worn pouch that contained only a few useless trinkets, his voice breaking as he pleaded for more time. But the guards sneered and mocked him, saying an elder like him had no place on such a station, that he was a burden on resources, that he should leave and never return. And their words cut into him like knives though he tried to hold his dignity. Yet his knees shook and his heart felt heavy with shame, while nearby a human traveler named Daniel, new to this part of the galaxy and unaccustomed to such cold cruelty, paused in his steps and watched carefully. For he had seen unfairness before, but the sight of a defenseless elder alien being cornered in front of a silent crowd stirred something in him, and though he knew humans were few and often underestimated on stations like Oroth, he felt a heat rise in his chest, a mix of anger and determination. As the guards began to shove Vorik back toward the edge of the platform, their hands rough, their voices cruel, and the old alien stumbled, his balance failing, nearly falling to the hard steel floor while the crowd gasped, but still did not act. And Daniel clenched his fists, his mind racing between caution and courage, knowing that if he stepped forward he would draw attention and possibly trouble. Yet something deeper whispered to him that if he walked away now, the image of the trembling alien would follow him forever, and so he took a step closer, his eyes locked on the scene, his footsteps echoing against the floor as though marking the beginning of something larger than himself, while the guards laughed louder and Vorik's quiet voice begged one last time, saying he had once been of value, that he only needed a little help. But the guards raised their arms as though to drag him out completely, and in that suspended moment the station seemed to grow quiet, as if waiting to see whether anyone would dare to break the pattern of silence, and Daniel's voice, steady but firm, cut through the air, carrying more weight than his figure suggested. And though the guards had not yet turned to face him, the crowd shifted slightly, sensing that something different was about to unfold, and so began the struggle at the station, not just for Vorik's dignity but for the meaning of kindness. In a place ruled by fear and indifference, Daniel's voice reached the guards like a stone thrown into still water, sharp enough to break their rhythm, and when they turned to see who dared to interrupt, their eyes fell on a single human standing with quiet confidence, his clothes simple, his face calm yet firm, and though he was not tall compared to them, there was something unshaken in his stance that made the crowd lean in with curiosity. For humans were not common in this region, and rarely did they intervene in station affairs. Yet here was one stepping forward where dozens of others remained still, and Daniel asked in a clear tone how much the old alien owed, his words cutting through the tension with a strange calm that unsettled the guards, who laughed in disbelief and mocked him for caring about a relic, who should have been gone long ago. But Daniel did not react to their insults, his gaze fixed on Vorik, who stood with trembling hands, shame written across his aged features, and the human could see in the elder's eyes both a flicker of hope and the deep exhaustion of one who had been pushed too far. And without hesitation Daniel reached into his pouch and produced the credits needed, placing them firmly on the nearby counter so there would be no excuse, his action drawing a wave of whispers from the crowd that had gathered in a circle, many watching with surprise and others with hidden admiration, for none of them had expected such boldness from an outsider. And as the guards realized that their attempt to humiliate Vorik had been cut short by a single human, their laughter faltered and turned into scowls their pride wounded more than their authority, and they exchanged glances heavy with annoyance before snatching up the payment and stepping back. Yet their eyes burned with quiet resentment, for they could not punish Daniel openly with so many witnesses. But their silence carried a promise that this was not the end, and Vorik, still shaken, bowed his head to Daniel, whispering words of gratitude though his voice quivered as if unused to kindness. While Daniel helped him rise and steady himself, his hand firm on the elder's shoulder, and for a brief moment the scene seemed to close with relief, but beneath the surface a dangerous thread was being woven. For Daniel had unknowingly disrupted something larger than an overdue bill, and the guards, humiliated before a crowd, would not allow such a challenge to pass without consequence. Their whispered threats carried to each other as they withdrew, plotting in low tones that the human would regret his interference. And though the crowd soon dispersed, some walked away with sparks of courage in their hearts, speaking quietly about what they had witnessed, while others kept silent out of fear. But Daniel could feel the eyes that still lingered on him, some filled with respect, others with suspicion, and Vorik clutched his arm as they moved away from the open concourse, his voice low as he thanked him again. Yet Daniel noticed something strange in the way the old alien looked around, as if expecting danger even now, and he realized that what seemed like a simple act of kindness might have placed both of them under the shadow of greater forces within the station, forces that thrived on silence and control. And as the lights of the corridor flickered above them, Daniel could not shake the feeling that his choice had changed more than just one moment, that he had stepped onto a path where every decision from now on would matter. And the sound of armored footsteps echoing faintly from behind confirmed his suspicion that the guards had not let go of their anger, that they were watching, waiting, and ready to strike when the chance came. And thus what began as a single question in the concourse had become the start of something deeper, a chain of events neither he nor Vorik could yet see in full, but both felt in the rising tension of the air around them. The narrow passage away from the concourse was dim and quieter than the wide-open hall, the air filled with the low hum of machines and the faint hiss of vents releasing steam. And as Daniel walked beside Vorik, he noticed how the old alien's shoulders seemed to carry not only the weight of age, but also the invisible burden of fear. For every few steps Vorik turned his head slightly, as if listening for footsteps behind them, his long fingers trembling when he adjusted the folds of his robe. And Daniel, though calm on the surface, felt his own chest tighten because he could sense that the elder's anxiety was not only about the humiliation of moments before, but about something much larger that he had not yet revealed. And when they reached a quieter corner near the outer docking tunnels, Vorik finally stopped, leaning against the wall with a heavy breath, his voice soft and uneven as he spoke words of gratitude, telling Daniel that kindness was rare on the station and that no one had stood for him in a very long time. And the human listened carefully, his eyes fixed on the weary alien who now lowered his head as though ashamed of needing help. But then Vorik's tone shifted, carrying a hint of secrecy, as he explained that the debt had been more than a simple unpaid bill, that the guards had been sent with a purpose, that they wanted him gone from the station entirely because he carried knowledge that others feared would be uncovered. And Daniel frowned, his curiosity sparking at those words, pressing gently for an answer. And Vorik hesitated, his ancient eyes glinting in the flickering light, before admitting that he had once been the keeper of star maps older than most civilizations remembered, maps that showed hidden routes and forgotten resources in distant systems, treasures of knowledge that certain powers wanted buried. And before Daniel could even process the weight of what he had just learned, the sound of boots striking metal echoed faintly from the shadows behind them, steady and deliberate, not rushed but intentional. And Vorik froze, his body stiffening as his voice dropped to a whisper warning Daniel that they were being followed, that the guards who had been shamed in front of the crowd would not let go so easily. And Daniel's hand clenched into a fist at his side, his mind racing with questions he could not ask now, for the echoing steps were growing louder, closer, until even the air seemed to thrum with the approach. And Daniel realized that stepping in to pay a stranger's bill had tied him to something much larger, that the old alien's secret was not only dangerous to himself, but now also dangerous to anyone who chose to stand beside him. And yet as Vorik looked at him with fear and uncertainty, Daniel felt no regret, only a sharpened resolve. For he knew that walking away now would be easier, but it would leave the elder to be crushed by forces too great for him to resist. And Daniel was not one to abandon someone who had already been cast aside, so he straightened his posture, his eyes narrowing toward the corridor where the sound of metal on metal grew closer with each step, and the shadows stretched long as though the station itself held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when those who hunted them finally emerged into the light. The footsteps grew louder until two shadows stretched across the narrow corridor, and from the dim light emerged the same guards who had mocked Vorik earlier, their faces set in grim smiles that carried no humor, their eyes fixed not only on the old alien, but also on the human who had dared to interfere. And Daniel could feel the tension in the air thicken like a storm about to break. Yet, before the guards could speak, Vorik lifted his trembling voice, urging Daniel to listen quickly because time was short. And he revealed with urgency that he had once been entrusted with the safekeeping of ancient star maps, records etched into crystal and code long before most of the station's inhabitants were born. And those maps were not simple navigation charts, but keys to hidden lanes through dangerous sectors, shortcuts across vast stretches of space, and even the locations of long-abandoned worlds rich with resources. And for years he had kept them guarded in secrecy, because he had sworn an oath to protect them, until the right hands could inherit their knowledge. But now he was hunted by those who saw profit and power in those secrets, and who would erase him, quietly to claim them for themselves. And Daniel listened closely, his mind racing as the old alien spoke, for he realized that the harassment was no accident, that the so-called debt was only a cover, that the guards served interests far beyond simple station law. And while Vorik explained this, the two guards stepped closer, their voices low and menacing as they ordered Daniel to leave before it was too late, mocking him again for being a human far from home, and warning him that siding with Vorik would bring nothing but trouble. And though a part of Daniel knew they spoke the truth about the danger, he also knew the look in Vorik's weary eyes was not the gaze of a liar, but of one who carried heavy truth, and that truth had been hidden long enough. So Daniel remained where he was, refusing to step aside, and the guards narrowed their eyes at his defiance, muttering that others would soon come, stronger and more ruthless than them. And Vorik clutched at Daniel's arm, whispering that the decision before him was no small matter, that once he chose to walk this path there would be no turning back. Yet even as his voice shook with fear, there was a glimmer of hope in it too, as though he believed perhaps Daniel was the one he had been waiting for, the one worthy of knowing and protecting what he carried. And Daniel, feeling the weight of both the old alien's trust and the threat of the guards closing in, straightened his back, his voice steady as he told Vorik that secrets meant nothing if they died with him, that knowledge meant more when it was shared and defended, and that if these maps truly held the power Vorik claimed, then it was all the more reason not to abandon him. And the guards exchanged looks of irritation, muttering into their comms, signaling others perhaps, and the corridor seemed to pulse with quiet danger as if the walls themselves were listening. And in that moment Daniel understood that what had started as a simple act of kindness was unfolding into a struggle not just for an old alien's dignity, but for something vast and hidden, a struggle that might reach far beyond the steel walls of Oroth Station into the farthest corners of the galaxy. The sound of heavy boots grew closer as more guards arrived, their armor clanking against the metal floor and their presence filling the narrow corridor, until it seemed the walls themselves were pressing inward, and Vorik shrank back with fear in his eyes, his thin hands gripping Daniel's sleeve as though holding on to the last anchor left to him, while the lead guard raised his voice and declared that the elder alien was under arrest for disturbing order on the station, his words sharp and rehearsed as though spoken many times before. But Daniel saw through the false charge and felt a steady fire build inside him, for he could not stand silent while an innocent was crushed beneath lies. So he stepped forward and placed himself between Vorik and the advancing line of armored figures, his voice calm, yet unshakable as he said they would not take the old alien without going through him first. And for a moment silence fell, the crowd that had followed at a distance now gathering once again at the edges of the corridor, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear, and the guards hesitated, not because of his size or strength, but because his defiance carried a weight none of them had expected from a lone human traveler. And Daniel held his ground, his gaze unyielding, his voice echoing in the tense air as he reminded them that compassion was not a weakness, that dignity was not something to be stripped away. And though his words were simple, they struck deep, for whispers began to spread among the watching crowd, some murmuring that they too had suffered under the same cruel hands, others feeling courage stir in their hearts for the first time in years, and slowly, almost uncertainly, a few stepped forward to stand behind him, small shopkeepers, weary travelers, even a pair of young workers who had once been scolded by the same guards, and their presence shifted the balance. For now Daniel was not one voice but the beginning of many, and the guards, sensing their control slipping, tightened their grips on their batons. But hesitation flickered in their eyes because they knew open violence in front of witnesses would spark questions they could not silence. And Daniel saw this hesitation and pressed it further, lifting his chin and declaring that justice was not theirs to twist for profit, that the station belonged not to fear but to those who lived and worked upon it. And his words carried through the corridor like a current, igniting murmurs of agreement. And Vorak, though frail, lifted his head a little higher, his dignity returning as he realized he was no longer alone. And in that fragile but powerful moment, Daniel understood that this stand was not only for one old alien, but for everyone who had been silenced by intimidation. And though danger still loomed in the hard eyes of the guards and the shadows of those they served, the air had shifted, and for the first time, the enforcers of cruelty found themselves on the defensive, forced to consider whether their power could hold against the strength of a single human's kindness backed by the quiet courage of many. The tension inside the corridor rose like a storm trapped in steel walls, every eye fixed on the line of guards who now stood uncertain, their earlier arrogance slipping into unease as the crowd behind Daniel grew larger, whispers spreading like fire through dry grass. And then a heavy figure pushed forward, the commander of the guards, his armor darker and his presence heavier than the rest, his voice carrying the weight of authority as he barked for silence, accusing Vorak of crimes against the order of the station and branding Daniel an outsider meddler who would be punished for daring to interfere. But when his words echoed through the hall, they did not land with the force he intended, for the gathered onlookers no longer looked away in fear, but instead leaned closer, watching the human who had dared to stand when no one else would. And Daniel, though aware of the danger before him, did not flinch, his voice steady as he answered that no crime had been committed, except the cruelty of those who used power to break the weak. And his words rang with a quiet strength that made even those who had doubted him feel their hearts stir. And Vorak, standing beside him though frail in body, lifted his voice as well, his tone no longer trembling, but filled with a dignity long buried. And he spoke of the truth he had guarded, of the maps that held knowledge meant not for greed, but for discovery, of the legacy of countless generations that would not be erased by force or fear. And though the commander tried to silence him, the elder's words carried further than he expected, planting seeds of curiosity and doubt among the crowd. And in that moment, Daniel's kindness, a simple choice to pay an old alien's debt, had become the spark of something larger. For the people of the station began to step forward one by one, no longer whispering, but raising their voices, saying they had seen enough of unfairness, enough of silence. And with each step the weight shifted until the guards, who had once ruled through intimidation, found themselves outnumbered by the will of those who would no longer bend. And the commander, seeing the tide turning against him, gave a sharp order, and the guards withdrew with hard glares, promising retribution another day. But their retreat was not a victory for them, it was an admission of loss. And when they were gone, the corridor filled with a sound long absent cheers, voices united not in fear, but in hope. And Vorak's weary eyes glistened with tears as he looked at Daniel, whispering that he had restored to him not only dignity, but also belief that compassion still lived in the galaxy. And Daniel, though humbled, understood that his act had not been great in size, but great in meaning. For in choosing to stand, he had shown others they too could rise. And as the crowd dispersed with new strength in their steps, Vorik placed a hand on his shoulder and said that the maps he carried would not be lost, that they would be entrusted to one who had proven worthy, and Daniel felt the full weight of what lay ahead, knowing the path would be dangerous, but also knowing he would not walk it alone. For kindness had changed everything, and in the steel heart of Orath Station a human had reminded many species that courage begins with the smallest choice to do what is right.